Have you ever wondered how the patchwork of modern Europe came to be? The borders we recognize today are the result of centuries of migration, conflict, and cultural shifts that began long before nation-states existed. From the movements of ancient tribes to the fall of mighty empires, Europe's map was shaped by waves of history that forever changed the continent. At the peak of its power, the Roman Empire controlled half of Europe, ruling over vast territories with an unmatched military and sophisticated cities. Beyond the Roman borders, however, lived the barbarian tribespeople that the Romans considered uncivilized. The term barbarian itself came from the Romans' view of their languages, which they claimed sounded like incoherent babble. Despite the disdain, the Romans recognized the strength and bravery of these tribes in battle, often recruiting them into their armies. One of the most significant early threats to Rome came from the Germanic Cimbri tribe around 113 BC. The Cimbri and the Teutones crossed the Alps in search of new lands, as their homeland could no longer support their growing population. Their presence in Roman territory created panic. For the first time in a century, Rome faced a serious external threat as the Cimbri defeated Roman forces multiple times, shaking the empire's sense of security. After 12 long years of conflict, Rome finally crushed the Cimbri. But the encounter changed the relationship between Rome and the barbarian tribes. Rather than continue viewing them solely as enemies, Rome began to see value in these warriors. Julius Caesar famously recruited Germanic horsemen into his legions, and later, emperors like Tiberius even had Germanic guards for his personal protection. The tribes, meanwhile, were constantly on the move, seeking new lands and opportunities as their populations grew, which often led to more clashes with Rome. The migration period, also called the barbarian invasions, was a time of massive upheaval across Europe. Between the 5th and 6th centuries, tribes that had been constantly on the move began to settle down, forming the early foundations of modern European countries. But this wasn't a quick process. It spanned generations as people moved from one region to another, often clashing with others along the way. It was during this period that groups like the Goths, the Vandals, and Franks rose to prominence and shaped the future of Europe. The Goths, for instance, originally came from Gotland, which is a part of modern-day Sweden. As their population grew, they began to migrate south in search of new lands and opportunity. By the 3rd century, they reached the Roman Empire's borders, causing tensions to rise. Initially, some Goths were welcomed as refugees within the empire, but their relationship with Rome quickly turned sour. Famine, broken promises, and conflicts with local Roman officials eventually led to Gothic rebellions. One of the most significant moments came in 378 AD at the Battle of Adrianople, where the Goths crushed the Roman army and killed the emperor, marking a turning point, not just for the Goths, but the Roman Empire itself. The empire was already weakened, and it simply couldn't defend its borders as effectively as before. This gave the Goths the chance to move further south, eventually setting up their kingdoms within the Roman territories. Over time, these Gothic kingdoms became a significant part of European history. The Visigoths, under the leader Alaric, famously sacked Rome in 410 AD, an event that symbolized the beginning of the end for the Western Roman Empire. Eventually, the Visigoths settled in what is now Spain and parts of southern France, creating a kingdom that would later blend into the developing European nations. The role of the Germanic tribes in the fall of the Roman Empire is one of the most dramatic stories in all of history. These tribes, initially seen as outsiders and sometimes even welcomed as refugees, would eventually bring the mighty Roman Empire to its knees. The Goths are a perfect example of this transformation. At first, the Goths sought refuge within Roman borders, fleeing from the Huns and other pressures in their homelands. Rome allowed them in, hoping that they would help defend the empire. But things quickly went wrong. One of the key moments that signaled the decline of Rome was the Battle of Adrianople in 378. The Roman Empire, which was already weak from internal struggle, faced a devastating defeat at the hands of the Goths. The Roman army was crushed, and the emperor himself, Valens, was killed in battle. This wasn't just a military loss, it was a psychological blow to Rome's sense of invincibility. The empire had long prided itself on its military power, and now it was being outmaneuvered by people that they had once considered barbarians. The Goths, particularly the Visigoths, didn't stop there. Under the leadership of Alaric, they would go on to sack Rome in 410 AD, marking a symbolic end to Rome's dominance. For centuries, Rome had stood at the center of the world, a beacon of power and civilization. Alaric's invasion shattered that image. The sack of Rome was a clear sign that the empire could no longer protect itself from external threats. The Huns were one of the most feared forces in all of Europe during the 4th and 5th centuries. Known for their lightning-fast cavalry and brutal tactics, they struck fear into the hearts of both the Romans and the barbarian tribes. Led by the infamous Attila, the Huns ravaged vast stretches of Europe, leaving destruction in their wake. What made the Huns so terrifying wasn't just their speed and ferocity in battle, but also the unpredictability of their attacks. Entire regions would be left devastated before anyone knew that they were coming. Under Attila's leadership, the Huns became nearly unstoppable. He managed to unite the various Hunnic tribes and create a military force unlike anything that Europe had seen before. Attila didn't just target one group, he attacked everyone, including the Roman Empire and barbarian kingdoms. His ambition was vast. He sought only not to conquer land, but to force kingdoms to submit to his will. The Romans, already weakened by internal strife and external threats, were forced to pay tribute to keep the Huns at bay. Attila even made demands for Roman territory as part of a marriage proposal to the emperor's sister, using it as a pretext for war when he didn't get his way. The peak of Attila's power came in 451, during the infamous Battle of the Catalonian Plains. For once, Roman forces and barbarian kingdoms like the Visigoths set aside their differences and united against the Huns. Though the battle didn't completely crush Attila's forces, it slowed them down enough to prevent them from taking complete control of Western Europe. However, the real turning point came in 453 when Attila died unexpectedly. His sudden death threw the Hunnic Empire into chaos, and his sons all fought for control. Without Attila's leadership, the empire crumbled, and the once feared Huns quickly faded from the stage of history. The final waves of migration and conflict during the early medieval period were crucial in cementing the borders of what would later become modern Europe. By this point, many of the barbarian tribes had already carved out their territories, but there were still significant shifts that would shape the continent for centuries to come. One of the most notable movements was that of the Anglo-Saxons. As the Roman Empire weakened, the native Britons were left vulnerable, and the Anglo-Saxons began settling in what is now England. These tribes, originally from North Germany and South Denmark, gradually pushed the Britons to the fringes of the island. Some Britons fled to what we now know as Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany in France, while others remained and tried to resist the invaders. The Anglo-Saxon dominance eventually laid the foundation for the Kingdom of England and significantly influenced the English language and culture. In mainland Europe, the Franks were rapidly rising to power. Under the leadership of Clovis, the Franks not only secured a strong foothold in Gaul, but also defeated the Visigoths at the Battle of Vuilly in 507. This victory allowed the Franks to control a large portion of southern Gaul, effectively pushing the Visigoths into what is now Spain. Clovis's reign was a turning point as he became the first Frankish king to convert to Christianity, which strengthened his ties with the Roman Catholic Church. His conversion played a crucial role in the spread of Christianity across Europe and solidified the Frankish kingdom as the foundation of modern France. Meanwhile, the Lombards were making their mark in Italy. Originally a Germanic tribe, the Lombards had helped the Byzantines fight against the Ostrogoths, who had ruled Italy after the fall of the Roman Empire. After assisting the Byzantines, the Lombards decided to stay and establish their kingdom in northern Italy. Their rule lasted for many centuries, and the Lombards played a vital role in shaping the Italian peninsula's political and cultural landscape. The Slavic peoples also began to migrate and settle during this time, particularly in Eastern Europe. As they moved into areas that were previously under Roman or Byzantine control, they formed the early foundations of what would become countries like Poland, Russia, and the Balkans. Their integration into European society was also influenced by the spread of Christianity, as many Slavic tribes were eventually converted by Byzantine missionaries. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.